Hi, baby. Oh, are you leaving? Okay. Hi, I'm Morgan. This is my channel, Pisces Paperbacks, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in January. I read 20 books in January, which is the most books I've ever read in a month, which is crazy, and I'm going to say that a lot of it is probably due to the smut-a-thon I did. I don't usually read so many short books, like right back to back to back, so that really helped. This probably won't ever happen again, especially since I'm planning on prioritizing physical books that I already own instead of just reading like constantly really short ebooks. So anyway, I read 20 books this month and I want to talk about them with you. There are quite a few books that I've already talked about in depth on this channel, especially in my New Year's Eve reading vlog and my smut-a-thon vlog, so I'm not going to be talking about those in this video. I will mention them in the star rating I gave them, but I'm not going to go into depth, and you can look at those videos. I will link them in the sky so you can go check those out. But the first book I read this year was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, which I gave 5 stars. It was amazing. The next book I read was The Play by J.H. Croix, which I gave 3.5 stars. Trouble by Lexi Timms, 2 stars. For the Love of Scott by Jen FitzGerald, 2 stars. Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, 5 stars. Ruthless King by Meghan March, 4 stars. Defiant Queen by Meghan March was also 4 stars. And Sinful Empire by Meghan March was 5 stars. Give Me Love by Paige P. Horne was 3 stars. Lover Revealed by J.R. Ward was 4.5 stars. And Lover Unbound by J.R. Ward was also 4.5 stars. I know I just said I wasn't going to talk about those, but I do want to give a particular shout out to Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston because that is probably my favorite book that I read this month. It is definitely a new all-time favorite book, and if you don't know what it's about the son of the first woman president falling in love with one of the princes of England, and it's perfect. It's so good. So that's how I felt about it. I already said it was 5 stars, but now you know a little bit more. The first book I'm actually going to talk about in depth is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I read this book as part of this Love Drunk book club that my friend Hannah and I are starting, and we actually made a video talking about this book, but it hasn't been posted yet, so I will link that whenever it comes out. But I actually really liked Ninth House. I gave it 4 stars, and I know that when it first came out, it was very divisive. There were people who really didn't like it and people who really liked it. I feel like I would have liked it more if I had read it straight through. I actually read this book over a couple weeks. Like, I read bits and pieces of it over 2 weeks, and then in one weekend I was like, okay, I need to finish it, and I read 150 pages in one day. So I feel like I would have appreciated it more if I had read it all the way through, and I definitely plan on reading it all the way through again before the second book comes out, whenever that happens. But I actually really liked Ninth House. Let me tell you what it's about. It is about Galaxy Stern, aka Alex, and she can see ghosts, and she is invited to join the Ninth House at Yale University to basically oversee the goings-on of the 8 actual magical occult houses that are studying magic at Yale. I really liked it. I loved the magic that happened. I loved the descriptions of the magic. I loved the character growth that like a lot of the characters go through. I think the world building was just really fantastic and interesting, and that's the type of like bits at a time world building that I really appreciate. I also think it was a really good use of dual timelines, which doesn't always work for me, but I really liked it. The complaints that I had were that I feel like we don't get to know Darlington well enough, one of the main characters. He's very present in some portions, and he's kind of a shadow over other portions, but I just feel like we don't get to know him well enough, and I'm really looking forward to that in the next books. I also know that these books are very graphic. There's a lot of trigger warnings that go along with them, including sexual assault, child sexual assault, drug use, death, violence, gore, body horror. Basically, if it's bad, it's in there. I know it's awful to say that I didn't mind it, and that's not what I mean. It was definitely a part of the story. It's an important part of the story. The story is about survivors and survivors of abuse and survivors of bad situations. Like that, it's an important part of the story that those negative things be there, but I don't think that those negative things are glorified in any way. They're not glorified in any way. And they're never given the beautiful descriptive writings and just the beautiful descriptive imagery is saved for those beautiful things in the book, like the magic and friendships and the architecture and all those things like that. Like the negative things are described very matter-of-factly, and then it's moved on and they really talk about the effects of that emotionally. So that's definitely something to watch out for. If there's something in there that you think could be triggering for you, definitely maybe go like do a little bit more research. But I don't feel like there was an overabundance of horrible things. I felt like it was important to the story that all of it be there. Next, I want to talk about A Wind in the Door by Madeleine L'Engle. This is the second book in the Wrinkle Quartet or something like that. The second book in the Wrinkle in Time series. Unfortunately, I didn't really like this. I gave it 2.5 stars, and it honestly, the audiobook gave me a headache, so that's not really the best sign, but it just wasn't my favorite. The first book follows Meg and her brother Charles Wallace and their friend Colin as they travel through space and time to save Meg and Charles Wallace's dad. This book is about Charles Wallace being sick, and Meg and Colin and a eldritch horror angel Nephilim, don't remember his name, kind of have to like, I don't know, learn about accepting and loving everybody in order to save Charles Wallace's mitochondria. And that whole description is exactly as weird and thrown together as this book sounds. It was just very disconnected, and it took forever for the plot to start. And I liked the characters. I like Meg, even though she's like whiny and indecisive and doesn't like doing things. Like, I like her, but I just really wasn't a fan of this book, and I'm definitely not going to continue, which is unfortunate since I really did enjoy the first one. But I really liked the next book I read, which is Nevermoor, The Trials of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. I gave this book 4 stars. It is the first book in a middle grade fantasy series about Morrigan Crow, and you haven't seen whimsical until you've read these books. Basically, Morrigan lives, it's a completely new fantasy world. Because I listened to it on audiobook, honestly, I don't remember the names of a lot of places, and that's one of the only things that I've really noticed listening to audiobooks, is that I lose names a lot more easily. When I read things with my eyes, I'm pretty good at holding on to the names of things, but I just wasn't able to do it this time. But she is in this fantasy world, and basically children that are born on Eventide, which is like a dark age year, are cursed, and they're very bad luck. And so she's approaching her 11th birthday, and on her 12th birthday there's probably going to be another Eventide, and she's going to die because cursed children like only live 12 years until the next Eventide. Anyway, she is swept up by this man, this mysterious man, Jupiter North, and brought to Nevermoor and told that she is going to be trying to get into the Wondrous Society, which is like this, like, I don't know, it's kind of like a school for people with knacks, which can be magical talents or very, very impressive, like, normal talents. And we're just kind of following Morrigan along as she's, you know, finding people who actually like her and learning that maybe she isn't, like, absolutely the worst luck ever. And it's just so cute. I mean, I want to say I want to say Harry Potter vibes, because it involves, like, a child not knowing about magic, then going to a magical school of some sort. But honestly, like, that is the baseline of similarities. And I really enjoy this book. I think Morrigan is a really interesting, self-aware character. I wish she had a little bit more agency in her decisions, but she's also 11, so I understand if there might be a little issues there trying to figure out how she's going to do things. But I really liked this book. I completely forgot that I brought my copy of 9,000 here to hold up while I was talking about it, so now I'm going to have to put a picture up on my video. But I did read this one physically. I read 5 books physically this month, but one of them I had to give to someone because we're reading it for a book club and she needed a copy. Anyway, the next book I did not like as much, which was very unfortunate, and that was Atonement by Ian McEwan. I actually DNF'd this. I read 210 pages, and it was just too painful for me to do emotionally. Like, I cannot deal with secondhand embarrassment. I just wasn't enjoying the writing. I wasn't enjoying the story. And I'm probably going to read this eventually in very, very small doses over the next several years and get to the end, even though I do know what happens. I looked it up. But this is the story of Bryony, and she is a 13-year-old girl, and she's a writer. And It's basically about a great wrongdoing that Bryony commits on this one day that half of the book takes place over this one night. And it's this great wrongdoing and how it kind of affects the rest of her life, as well as her sister and another man that they both know. And I couldn't do it. It's a World War II. It's like set right pre-World War II. So I really wanted to read a historical fiction, but unfortunately, this was not it. Next, I read Dark and Deepest Red by Anna Marie McLemore. This is an advanced reader edition that I just like happened to stumble upon somewhere. And so I read this. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was good though. So this book is a combination of the stories of the dancing plague that happened in France and the fairy tale of the red shoes. And basically it happens in 2 timelines. One with this girl Lala in 1518 Strasbourg and her family possibly being accused of starting this dancing plague. And then it also takes place in 2018 with a boy and a girl, Emile and Rosella, and their town every summer or every autumn has this like 2 weeks of magic, and the red shoes are kind of taking over Rosella's life. And the writing is beautiful, the descriptions are beautiful. There's a lot of really important discussions of about race and being an outsider and what it means to have this family history, this heritage that is very important to you but maybe isn't understood by other people. Specifically, there are Romani characters in this book, and I am not Romani, but I am Jewish, and there is an ancestral knowledge that does come with some things like that, so I could relate to a lot of that, even though I do know I'm not a person of color and I have not faced that type of oppression. There also is a trans character in here and a bunch of other really good representation. My issues were that it was just a little too short. I wish we had more time with each of the characters, so I really don't feel like I got to know Emile and Rosella that well. I feel like Lala's story in 1518 was really well developed and really interesting, and Emile and Rosella, I was just very confused as to where this was taking place. It never specifies if it's in America, is it France, what's happening? I don't know. That's not really a big deal. It's not really important to the story, but it did bother me a lot because I was trying to picture what was happening and I had no idea where they lived. And I also feel like I wish we had more perspective from the person, a really important character in the 1518 storyline. I just feel like we didn't get to know, what's his name, Alifair. He's lives with Lala and her aunt, and I just wish we'd gotten to know him better. And that's really one of my biggest complaints, is I just feel like I didn't get to know a lot of the characters as well as I wanted to, and it kind of held me back from getting so emotionally involved with the story. However, I am definitely going to read more of Anna Marie McLemore's books. They are an extremely talented author. I'm very interested in the rest of their books. So this one wasn't it for me, Up next, I read American Gods by Neil Gaiman. This book tells a story of Shadow after he is released from prison. And Shadow gets hired by a mysterious Mr. Wednesday to be his protector as the old gods of the old countries and the new gods of America kind of start to battle it out. And it's very much a meandering story. It's also kind of a love letter to Middle America, which is really funny since Neil Gaiman is literally British. But I really liked this book. I don't know why I gave it 3.5 stars on my spreadsheet, and I'm probably gonna bump that up to a 4-star, so it's a 4-star book. I really loved Shadow. I loved the meandering storyline. I loved how Shadow was both a mystery, he was an enigma, but we also just knew him so well. And I loved the integration of mythologies. It was a very wide array of mythology that was there. Some of the most significant ones were Norse mythology was really present, as well as, old country, Eastern European countries. There was also African gods that were talked about, and, indigenous American gods. And it was just so good. There were parts that I wasn't as much a fan of. Specifically, there are interludes that aren't taking place in the story, but still have to do with basically basically they're interludes called Coming to America. They're each called that, and they're each a story of a different kind of deity around the world being brought to America with the original people. And it's just, if people believe, they bring their belief. If people believe, they bring their belief over to America with them, and then the gods follow. And it was lovingly crafted, this entire book, and I just really enjoyed it. I do have to say, this is the 10th anniversary edition, and in the foreword, which was read by Neil Gaiman, very good. It was also a full cast, which is this is the first full cast audiobook I've ever listened to, and it was really, really good. But in the foreword, Neil Gaiman says that because it's the 10th anniversary edition, and he wanted to make some changes, so he added some things, he took some things away, he added some scenes, and I believe the whole book with like the afterword and the foreword is about 100 pages longer than the original copy. And I'm definitely not going to do this now because I just read it, but I think it would be really interesting one day to get a copy of the 10th anniversary edition and the original edition and kind of go through and see what was changed and what was added and how I feel that like adds to the story. But yeah, I really, really liked it. It was so good. I felt like a little bit emotionally distant from it, but that didn't really stop my enjoyment. You know? I don't know. It was really good. Up next, I read Where the Crawdads Sing by Julia Owens. This was the book I read for my book club at work, which is really fun, and I'm so glad I read it, but I was really not sure I was gonna like this one. It's not really my style. It's historical literary fiction about a girl named Kaya who kind of has to grow up on her own in a marsh in North Carolina, and how the isolation that she goes through. And then it also takes place in the present where someone in the town near where she lives has been murdered. And it was so freaking good. 4.5 stars, not 5 stars, because it took me a really long time to get invested. I felt completely neutral about the book until like the last 50 pages, and then I cried my way through the last 50 pages. Like, it was so good. And it was so smart and well written, and the nature, like the imagery, the nature writing in this book was fantastic. And Kaya as a character is just so complex and interesting, and the way that Julia Owens really brings like a lot of the thoughts about nature that occur earlier in the book back around at the end of the book is so good. I didn't really like, there was a lot of poetry that was really important to the story, and I ended up liking it because at the end, like, the significance of it becomes clear, but I'm just not really a poetry person, and I did skim over a lot of it and have to like go back and like reread to make sure I didn't miss anything. But I really like this book. I highly recommend it to people. I know that it's like extremely popular, and like my Grammy recommended it to me, and because her book club read it, and like, oh, it was like Oprah's pick for her book club. And honestly, a lot of the times that kind of hype puts me off of books. So if you're like that, if you're like me, and you kind of just don't like reading popular things because like just for the sake of like knowing what it's about, highly recommend. Big recommend. Very good. And it was also a fast read. There were a lot of really short chapters. Next, I read The Secret Garden. I don't have the dust jacket anymore. I threw it away when I was young and stupid. But this is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and this tells the story of Mary Lennox, and she was raised in India. Her parents were some sort of something there. I'm not really sure. They were in some sort of like power during British imperialism there. Anyway, her parents die, and she is sent back to England to live with her distant uncle, Mr. Craven. And she is just this sour, bitter, selfish, mean little girl until she starts to spend more time outside and get really interested in the nature of kind of like the moors near her uncle's estate. And she really becomes obsessed with the idea of this secret garden that was hidden 10 years ago. Basically, Mr. Craven's wife passed away. She had loved the garden, but she had passed away falling off a tree, like a branch had broken. And so in his like rage and sadness, he locked the door and buried the key. And Mary, just becomes really intrigued with the idea of finding this garden. And she, along the way, becomes friends with a poor boy from the moor. His name's Dickon, and just watching people grow with nature was so sweet and wholesome. I also think this book and the descriptions of beautiful, wild, messy greenery and the beauty of what's naturally there and not a manicured garden is like, it's probably the source of my love of like greenery and botanical gardens and things that are not like super well groomed, but they look a little overgrown. And this book is so good. I read it as a kid. It holds up. I mean, it was written in like 1911. There's some race stuff in here that isn't the best, but it's also not as bad as it could be, because I've read some not great stuff. So I really enjoy this. This is a great children's novel. I think people should still be reading it. I feel like you can learn a lot from it. I don't know, it was really good. The next two books I actually finished yesterday, so January 31st, just squeezing them in there, and that is Wondersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend, which is the second book in the Nevermoor series. The third one isn't going to come out until 2021, so I'm caught up and very anxious for the next one. And this book I gave 4 stars as well. It's the second book in the series, so I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but it really starts to delve more into the concept of good and bad being in the same person, and what is evil and what is magic, and loyalty, and how hard it is to make the right choice sometimes. I loved it, and it was also, at the same time, about making friends and finding your place. And I really like these books. These are probably some of my favorite middle grade magic stories that I read in a really long time. I mean, I haven't read any in a really long time, so that's probably why I'm so enthusiastic about them. But it's really good to get back in the swing of things with just a genuinely good series. I don't know. I'm very excited for the third one. Last but not least, I read BELLE, RÉVOLTE by Lindsay Miller. Don't know how to say the name. I think it's RÉVOLTE. Anyway, the cover's on the screen. And unfortunately, I was not a huge fan of this book. This was 2.5 stars for me. It is the kind of a Princess and the Pauper retelling, where there is the daughter of a noble family, Emily, and she is being sent to study the midnight arts. This world has a very gendered magic system. There's noonday arts and midnight arts. Noonday arts are for boys and men, and they're about healing and battle. So it's like you can become a physician, which is like magical healing, or you can become a chevalier, and it's like magical sword fighting or something like that. I don't know, we don't really get into it. And then there's midnight arts, which are for women, and those are illusions, divinations, and scrying. And Emily just wants to be a physician. She just wants to go to medical school and learn how to use her magic, because she's always been called to the noonday arts, and her mom is like, nah, you're going to this finishing school. And she finds a poor girl, Annette, and they switch places so that Annette, who desperately wants to study the midnight arts, can go to this finishing school, and Emily can run away and study the noonday arts. That entire plot that I just told you happens in the first 10 pages. It happens in the first chapter. There is no build-up, and honestly, I'm telling you now, my biggest problem with this book, I'm actually going to put out a full review, in 2 days, so maybe I shouldn't get too into this. Let me just say, 2.5 stars. I just had problems with pacing and world building. I will get into more detail in my full review. I actually really did enjoy the last third of this book, and there was a lot of really good discussions about class and class warfare and abuse of the lower classes. What are you talking about? Exploitation of the poor by the rich, and a lot of really good conversations about there's an asexual character, there's a trans character, there is a female-female romance, there's a lot of just good talks, good conversations, good things, but I just wasn't a huge fan. And unfortunately, that is how I ended January. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books. I'm so excited to jump into February. The first book I'm gonna read is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. I just got the audiobook and it's supposed to be so good. So let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought, and I will see you next time. Bye!